Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the podcast, Why Are You Sober? As always, I am Sam, the host and sober addict, and I'm so glad you all are here. Well, Why Are You Sober is a space where sober addicts come to share their stories of addiction, where it led them, how they got sober, and why they continue to choose sobriety today. The goal is just to spread some experience, strength, and hope to others, and particularly those who might be suffering. If you are a sober addict, I welcome you to come and share your story. You never know who might be listening and who your story connects with. Or if you're somebody struggling with addiction and need some help or have questions, please feel free to reach out. You can reach me through my website, whyareyousober.org, or my email is sam@whyareyousober.org. And you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So last week, I just want to say again, thank you to my friend Tripp for coming on and sharing his story and being so vulnerable. I know that can be hard, but the stuff that he shared was so great, and his story is so wonderful. And his partner, she is just one of the most amazing people in the world. And so I am so blessed to know them and have them in my life. Well, this week, we have a new person here. Her name is Carin. Carin and I go back to high school. And I just felt so honored that she agreed to come on and share her story. Her story is wicked cool. And it was so fun to just reconnect with her after 23 years. Cause yes, I graduated high school in 2000, so I feel old, but it was really great to connect with her. And it just felt like old friends just catching up. So I hope you all enjoy it. Sit back, relax, and let's start out with the serenity prayer. Good and gracious friend, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. So, Carin, I am so grateful that you have decided to come on this podcast. I can't believe it has probably been, 20 years since
20 years,
we've
20 years.
Seen each other?
Yes, yeah. At first I thought 25, and then I was like, all right, I'm aging myself here, which is okay. But
yeah, absolutely.
And usually my son, I was saying, is napping, but he might be joining us with some coos and occasional pops and sounds. He is 9 months, so enjoy that.
Of course, totally. I can't believe you're a mom. I was trying to think, so did you go to General Wayne?
No,
okay.
I was in O&J until high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you and I were only in high school together, and you were a year behind me, right?
Yep.
That was it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So I usually, in talking with my friends who come on, I ask them, what is your addiction?
All right. So my primary addiction, I would say, drugs and alcohol. And I usually say drugs first, I realize, and I don't know if that's just like a language thing and it flows better, or if it is because drugs, I guess, were my drug of choice. But it literally is anything that makes me feel different is my addiction.
Yeah. Okay. I understand that.
I even went so far as to, I wrote a song in my 20s, and it was called Sucker for a State Change. And it is about being addicted to having a change of mental or physical state. Of course, at that time, I had no idea that I was an alcoholic addict. I just wrote the song.
Yeah.
And that was almost my as I look back in hindsight. But yeah, anything I would pretty without question take if I could put it in my body and it would make me feel different. And I think that I probably am addicted to love and relationships and all that other stuff too.
Yeah. Like most of us addicts are. So no one escapes from it. So Carin, growing, when did your addiction start?
So I believe that it started in high school, which is interesting because I know that, you had cited not starting then, and it's everyone's story is a little different. But
yeah,
I guess as far as putting a substance in my body and being oh, okay, here we are, that would be high school. Yeah. But the idea of addiction, because I know in some literature it says, the idea of the actor and running the show and being the director on the stage. And I love that description because I think about it in like positive terms. Obviously, you and I both have like a stage background in our
Yeah.
lives.
We both, yep,
But
we were definitely the theater geeks back in high school.
yes, yes. But as a child, that was like a really intense part of my brain for me. Like I couldn't. I remember being a kid and feeling like why isn't everyone doing what I want them to do? Why is everyone treating me like I'm little? Like I would be 3 years old and like 35 in my brain,
Yeah.
and wondering like why is everyone patronizing me? And I was so intense and felt things so deeply and so intensely all the time. And looking back, it's like, do I say then that I was just, born an alcoholic addict? I don't know, but it definitely runs in my family. However, I think I was 15 and I got involved in like the cool slash like I don't know how to describe it. Like the kids who like take like environmental science like instead of chemistry, and like listen to Pink Floyd,
Yeah.
that crew. And I was like, yes, they like me. And I was in a band all of a sudden, other than just the marching band. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah, and so I got into that, but I had like this double life at 15. So like by day I was being a quote unquote good student and doing the marching band and all the other things that band and drama kids do, and by night I was using a lot of substances and just I felt like I was different people, and that just compounded over the years, that idea of like being a different person for a different role in your life. And it's exhausting. Like it's absolutely exhausting. I remember standing in marching band at band practice at attention. If you're a band kid, you know what I'm talking about, like hands up, hand over hand. And I was on morphine at the time, and I was like, just like recreational. And I remember standing there like, oh wow, my two people are colliding right now. What do I do? And and I had to like march forward, like literally march. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I think that had I known at the time, I could have addressed all this way sooner than when I did. But that was probably like, I feel like that was the moment I realized this was really going to be a part of my, or maybe I didn't realize, but now I know that's when it became a part of my life for the long term.
Wow. So, yeah, I remember talking with my sister about this thing called highly sensitive people.
Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah, and that is really sounding. I mean, she says my sister's like everyone in our family is highly sensitive, but I mean that really sounds like very similar to what was going on with you. That you were just very highly sensitive to to your feelings, to your surroundings, to everything.
Yep. So. Yep. And now I have this daughter who is like, I think of her and that highly sensitive quality. And it's so interesting because it's like you want to nurture it, because I think it's a really amazing like way to human in the world, but it's also hard, and I think we're learning more about it and how to address it and how to function, with that, so that we don't use and drink to either mask or numb or all the reasons that we do that,
or just to cope. I mean, I think I mean that's where I go to in my own story, is that I just was trying to cope, and I was like, this is making me feel better. So
yep, if it makes you feel better. And sometimes strangely, coping for me would even look like, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but like, even if it didn't make me feel better, back to that idea of it feeling different, sometimes coping for me was feeling bad if that bad feeling seemed to match what I thought I deserved, or what that big feeling of like anger or big feeling of sadness. If I could physically make my body go to that place, it's like it aligned, and so it wasn't always even about like feeling happy or good. It was just like feeling some sort of coherence with those big, sensitive, highly sensitive feelings that would just come and sort of wash over us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, but like you, I didn't have, I had a pretty great childhood growing up. Things happened, and I think, not rich, not poor, somewhere in the middle. But there were some like things in my family that happened that I guess weren't as idyllic as my childhood was sold to me. Not terrible, terrible things, not even things that changed the course of, too much of our future, but it was like things that, I grew up and I sort of had this idea of what childhood looked like. And I have very loving parents still, like super loving, super funny, connected, supportive parents. And I am so grateful for that. And I have one younger brother, and he's like about as like healthy in terms of this stuff as you can imagine. He's just the complete opposite of me.
Wow.
He's like in corporate America, and he like goes to the gym, and he's great, but he's like, I'm like, how are we, other than having like the same face with like slightly different
Yeah.
attributes, like we're very different people. But so it was all, we had this like pretty typical suburban upbringing with, and typical in terms of like when you would think of like, oh, that sounds nice. I know that's not typical for everyone. But yeah, then I think I was like 19 when I found out some stuff that had happened in my family, and I was like, wait a second, like that doesn't match. And I don't know. I used that, and I don't want to go into it because I've learned over the years, like that's someone else's story and not mine.
Yeah.
But,
Absolutely. No problem.
But yeah, but like, it was sort of like, okay, well, I can't trust anything now. Also, I'm probably going to make all these same choices that this person made. So F it. Like, I'm just going to go off to the races with whatever, because nothing matters. And it's like becoming this like, nihilist all of a sudden about how to live life. And but it wasn't, I was blaming, I was doing a lot of blaming for family stuff rather than saying like, okay, I can make my own choices. I'm 19, I can move on and do things. But I certainly made my own choices. They just weren't necessarily very good ones for the next set of years.
Yeah. So after high school, like, and so you have now made a pattern of using substances to make yourself feel better. So then how did everything play out through college and later on?
Yeah, college actually. So I also was able to, for a good amount of time, sort of switch off like or at least take a break and do things, a little more straight laced for a while. I should not say the term straight laced because, by the way, I relate a little bit to the idea of sexuality because I'm not gay, I'm bisexual, and that was a part of like figuring things out. But anyway, I digress. But
no, I mean, I think that's a huge part of. I think that's also a huge part of it is that for those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, like queer, gay, all that had a lot of negative connotations societal wise, and then also for any of us who are in religious backgrounds, so we didn't have an adolescence basically because we tried to hide it. So I think that's a huge part of it. Like, don't downplay that at all.
No, you're right. Sometimes I downplay it because sometimes, especially if I'm talking to someone who identifies as gay, I feel like I haven't had to deal with some of those, some of the same discrimination, some of the same things that they've had to deal with. So I almost feel like I don't like deserve that, like, you know what I mean, as a bisexual person, because it's like, well, here I am, I'm in this heterosexual marriage now.
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not facing any of the stuff that my gay friends are facing, but so I do tend to downplay it. But it's funny because they'll all say the same thing. They're like, Carin, just like be a bisexual woman. It's okay. Like,
just own it.
Exactly.
Don't be like, throwing, don't be a martyr because you don't need to.
Yeah.
Like, be the supportive, awesome person you are, and accept it.
Yeah. Because I realize we have to accept it. Yeah, in ourselves. Because how is our allyship ever authentic if we're not honest about ourselves? And that actually, it's funny you say that, because to go back to that idea of childhood before I talk about college, I mean, I was writing in my journal as a little kid, I think that I like girls. I think and my first sexual feelings and experiences were with girls, like as a young girl, experimenting, and that was confusing. And I remember I actually ripped those pages out of my journal, like crushed them out and then ripped them out and then threw them out because I didn't want anyone to read it.
Yeah.
And and then the thing that you're saying about like how it wasn't, the 80s, 90s, I think that I was thinking about this before we talked about how the other thing that in a totally different way wasn't part of life as much, and like wasn't sort of accepted unless you were really, really, really off the rails, was like rehab. I remember like getting help for any of this, or even therapy, like anything that would like address mental health or rehabilitation in any way, was like you would hear about like the kid in the next town over who went to rehab.
Oh yeah.
You know? Like,
oh yeah.
Or like, you know, or like that person's in therapy. And it was like you had to be really, like, it wasn't a thing that everyone did or encouraged.
Oh no, not definitely not yet. And then also I was just thinking about this. Like, I mean, one of my favorite shows is Friends, but when you think back on looking at Friends, they always made fun of Chandler for possibly being gay.
Yes.
You know? Like, and then finally when Will and Grace came out, but that was like 1998. Like, it was the end of high school, really. And so it was just like, I don't know if I'm allowed to like this show. Like, so yeah.
No, totally. So much has changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that idea with college, which incidentally was where more of that exploration happened, because college, I was, I'm a really great faker of things. That sounds so bad. But I had interviewed for this scholarship to college, and I was, did well in school, but I wasn't like the valedictorian or anything like that. But there was this interview-based scholarship at a school down in North Carolina, and I knew I wanted to be a music therapist. That was something that once I discovered existed at 17, I was like, that's it. Like, that is exactly what I want to do with my life. I come from, like, my mom was a special education teacher. My dad owned a music store, and that wasn't on purpose to merge my parents into a career, but, I was like, that's it. And it put me on this trajectory when I got a scholarship to go to a small liberal arts school down south in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I had a really good college experience, actually. Sorry, my son is now a dinosaur, if you can hear him.
Yes, it's very cute, actually, so don't worry about it. It's fine.
All right, cool. It can be meditative for people in the background.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be fun.
So I went there and I really formed friendships that are still really long lasting. And I actually had a really good experience. Now, I did all the things that, like, I guess, you're expected to do in college with drinking and, smoke pot or this or that. But it wasn't until after that I started to really make some more zany choices, impulsive choices. And I think part of it was that, I don't know, something about that space where I went to school and the people that I was with, I don't know. I look back on that and it was such a familial and supportive time. I don't think that I wanted to feel different as much. Like, I don't think I had that sucker for a state change urge as often when I was in college.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that kind of makes
sense.
And so,
yeah, I don't know why. I maybe I should think about that more, and try to recreate that.
Well, I'm just thinking that you were, like we all did, we're suddenly experiencing a lot more freedom, freedom,
Yeah.
not having to check in with our parents, not like just being able
Mm-hmm.
to not having, we weren't accountable to anybody but ourselves, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
was just like figure it out. And so it totally makes sense to me that you suddenly were
Yeah.
like, okay, I can like kind of ease into this now. Like no
Yeah.
one's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And initially, like that space, like 18 to 22, I was pretty well adjusted, I would say. I got to a point where I had to treat, I have ADHD. So it's been a long road of doing things that aren't prescribed to me to self-medicate, and then finally coming to terms with it and figuring out how to exist and treat that in a healthy way in my sobriety, which I can get to later. But in college I really had like a reckoning with it, and I couldn't keep up, and I couldn't get my work done, and I started to really struggle and sort of went off course. Like I had this with a scholarship, a full ride. You like have to have a certain GPA. There's an expectation, to keep that.
Yeah.
And so I put a lot of pressure on myself, and then I didn't do it. Like I didn't graduate on time. And it wasn't all negative. I was just like, well, I'm just going to take a little more time. And they didn't penalize me for that. I just had to pay for some stuff, more classes. And um, I then, though, just started to choose things that were not well thought out, I guess. I got married very young. So I related to like the first marriage deal.
Yeah.
I like this podcast, by the way. I'm promoting your podcast in case anyone for some reason would listen to mine before yours, which they won't. But
Yeah.
make
No,
sure you
no.
listen
Thank
to
you.
Sam.
Yeah.
Sam's story first, because Carin's story references Sam's story. But it was, I got married like after meeting someone, and we fell in love, and it was like, this feels amazing, like a drug,
Yeah.
and got engaged at 6 weeks and married at 6 months. And I was just like, that all took off. And I really started, just everything I chose or did was extremely impulsive, appropriately for your 20s to a certain extent. But along with it came more alcohol, more drugs, just constant, like normalizing things like drinking like multiple bottles of wine every night because it was wine. We're
Yeah.
classy, we're grown-ups now, so we drink wine versus, beer in college. And um and then like everything would sort of level up, like we'd have the wine and we're like, oh, who brought the, I can like directly reference things in this, right? Like,
Yeah.
who brought the Coke, oh, cool, and I would find myself in lifestyles that supported this being part of it, like a musician. I was in a band with my ex-husband, and we weren't like out of control with it. It just was, part of the lifestyle. If you were a musician, sometimes you did this. And um, I drank probably daily, maybe skipping a beat every once and again, but it didn't seem to be like anything different than anyone else I was around.
Yeah.
Um, and so I took that sort of way of moving through the world and just like more of that. So we got divorced because it was we were too young. I was too young. Um, I was not faithful, and I manipulated a lot of situations at that time to sort of end up like, it was 26 or 27. I was like, I cannot be domestic. I need to live my life. I was a music therapist, but I was working full time, but that as music therapist is a different thing than like someone with like a job they go to 9 to 5 every day. I was working, like I was living in Philadelphia and working because my ex-husband and I had moved up to Philadelphia from Charlotte. I was working in Pottstown, living in Philly, and I would work like the mornings into like the evenings because you really had to piece together your job as in practice like that to make it work. And I was just like burning out, and then the drinking took off more.
Mm-hmm.
But when the divorce happened, I was so depressed and hit a complete, like, who am I? What am I doing with my life? That identity crisis thing that other drugs seem to help alongside the alcohol a lot more. And also toxic relationships. Like, I had a string of toxic relationships. The first of which being one that brought me to New York. And me and the person I was dating at the time were like, we were so cuckoo bananas, man. We did some things, like, I remember we, like, smoked a bunch of weed, and then we're like, we should go to New York tonight and, like, see if we want to live there. But we didn't make, like, any plan, and we had no money. So, like, we get there and we spent all our money at a raw foods restaurant for, like, one meal. And then we're like, oh, yeah, do you know anyone who, like, lives here? Can we stay anywhere? Because we didn't have any fare to get back home. No, so we just, like, had to sort of walk through New York the whole night and, like, fell asleep on the subway and on a bench a couple times. Just, like, poor planning. And I remember my paycheck came through that night, like, at like 5 a.m. My paycheck cleared. And so I went from, like, rags to riches and went to, like, whatever hotel we saw in that moment. And I was like, we're getting a room there. It was like $400 a night, probably like my whole paycheck at the time.
Oh my gosh.
So we stayed at, like, the Robe, and we're drinking and smoking, and everything in my life worked in extremes pretty much. There was no, like, how we talk about finding the middle, like, that was where I would avoid at all costs. Like, the middle was, like,
Boring.
very uncomfortable, boring. Yeah. Very vulnerable space
Yeah.
that I did not like to be. So and New York then after that, because clearly after doing all that, the correct decision is, yes, I have the means and the the plan to move there. I've proven that to myself with my one night debacle. So I moved to New York, and that's, like, really where stuff got pretty crazy. So yeah, I think that's where my disease took me to the point of knowing I needed to get sober for sure.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, you can go into as much as you want, or you can, at this point, move forward. Like, so then how, like, yeah, how did you get sober? Like,
yeah. So yeah, and I don't want to go, oh, my baby just knocked his head. I know, that's how I felt at the time too, Sebastian. So I was, living back to the two life thing, just like in high school with marching band, standing on the marching band field and attention on painkillers. I was living, like, two lives in New York. I was teaching kids music by day. And by night I was, living the life of, like, a Brooklyn artist, and really would find a way to surround myself with people who, in my view, were worse off than me. It wasn't even intentional. It was like, oh, okay, like, people do heroin here. That's, like, was as regular as walking to the end of the, maybe not as regular. Not everyone did it. I don't want to say that, but it was like I could normalize pretty much anything living there, any behavior, any substance. And as long as I found someone who was doing it more than me, it meant I was okay.
exactly. Oh yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I did that. And one of the people that I found was doing it more than me was someone I fell in love with, and he died. And that was, like, my holy whatever moment.
Yeah.
And it didn't get me sober, though, because, as this disease works, like, that doesn't always do it. I crashed pretty hard after that happened. Now, there were good times during that time. I mean, there was a lot of beautiful music made. I remember I got to have this really cool gig playing once every 2 weeks at a jazz club in Manhattan. So, like, certain life dreams were achieved a little bit. Those are things I look forward to telling my children about, that, mom did this. But alongside it was this very dark, very, just this dark underbelly of the whole thing. And, like, he wasn't the only person who passed. There was a lot of addiction, a lot of toxic relationships, a lot of codependence, a lot of stuff in that whole scene, along with all the magic. I was part of like an artist collective for 2 years, and it's weird because in a sense I wouldn't trade it, but in another sense, it really showed. I don't know, maybe it needed to get me to my bottom. Maybe that was part of the whole thing. So when I got sober after he died, and just a lot happened, there was just a lot of like, wow, I really need to get out of this place. Like, this is not healthy. Nothing was healthy. The food, the drugs, the mentality, the lack of resources, everything. And I moved to Florida, and I actually connected with someone that you and I both know from high school.
Yep.
And because again, I was like a serial monogamist.
Yeah.
I would just like skip from relationship to relationship. Weirdly, not with women. I've only like been with a couple women in my life, and I often look back and I'm like, why didn't I date more women? But I should have done that.
Yeah.
But I just would like jump from relationship to relationship. And, he was sober, and he and I had been really good friends throughout the whole like adolescence into 20s. And so we connected, and we were, we tried dating, but I was in no place to date, even though I was like, let's move in together. And, I guess I'm good at like convincing people that's a good idea, because he went for it. And I like moved to Florida. I know, I'm like, boy, I must be all powerful if I can convince a sober person to do something stupid. But I am not all powerful, as I've learned in the past 10 years. I just was really, I think both of us had some choices we were making at the time that we probably wouldn't make today. But I think I just really wanted to be somewhere where I felt safe again. I didn't feel safe in New York, and had done a lot of things like to create that unsafe space for myself, mentally safe, physically safe. So it felt safe in Florida. He felt safe. And I was completely inaccessible in terms of like relationship to him. And I was drinking. He was sober, and we had this apartment, and I was drinking every night. And my job was working at recovery houses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So not as a drug and alcohol counselor, but as a music therapist.
Oh, wow.
So I got these jobs when I moved down. Not all of it. I also worked in hospice, because there's a lot of like Florida is older age population, and then the recovery capital of the United States, pretty much.
All of the above.
Florida. Yes. So I worked in both those settings, and I would go and do a music therapy session with like a group of people who were alcoholics and addicts. And then I would leave, and I would go to the liquor store and buy a bunch of liquor and drink alone, because my, roommate was sober, my, boyfriend or whatever. And I didn't really see anything wrong with it for a while, because I spent so much time trying to manage other people's addictions and isms that I really couldn't look at my own. And then I just lost, I feel like I kind of had a little break. Like, I was on the way to work one day, and I couldn't do it. Like, I've always had anxiety, but it wasn't a panic attack. It's like, I truly feel like I had like a weird mental break. Like, I was driving, and all of a sudden I realized I couldn't drive. And I realized I wanted to I remember the thought I had, it was not, and I liked how you said trigger warning, but trigger warning, it was not suicidal. But at the time I was like, I want to be in the universe with my ex-partner who had passed. I just want to be there. I don't want to be here anymore. And I drove myself. I didn't have insurance at the time, of course. I also owed the IRS a lot of money, but I drove to like the mental health clinic there. And I remember going in, and they have you like fill out a card of like your drug and alcohol history. And I filled it out. And it was like, everything you could imagine. You know, it's, I don't know
Yeah.
if you're a Mr. Show fan, but there's a funny sketch where like a guy's taking a lie detector test and he starts to say these things he's done and it's like not turning up his lies and they just keep getting more and more extravagant. It was like that. Like I've done heroin, I've done, all these things because if you gave it to me, I would take it and I would, whatever, just, I don't know if I even hoped for the best. I just didn't really think about it. And the guy looked at the card after he filled it out. He's like, sort of like, are you sure your problem isn't that he didn't say it, but his like eyes are like, this is not like normal. Like, this, right? Like this could actually be why you're so sick or part of it.
Yeah.
And I remember I got, put on some medication, some anti-anxiety medication, but there was nothing they can't tell you like at the mental health clinic necessarily, like you're an alcoholic, you need to go. But I was seeing a counselor for grief therapy because of what had happened. And I remember I just asked her one time, I was like, I've been thinking, like, I wonder if this is actually what's going on with me too. I go to these groups and these people talk about these feelings and I'm like the facilitator of this group and we're writing these songs and I feel all the same ways and I do all the same things. I wasn't doing as hard drugs at that time, but I was drinking to deal with life like every day. And then until I didn't want to even really be in life. Again, being out in the universe, it's weird because now in hindsight, I'm like, the universe is my higher power. So I weirdly like wanted to like in an unhealthy way connect to my higher power at the brink of sobriety. And now in a healthy way, I want to connect to it. It's just very strange. But so yeah, she said to me, I'll never forget, she said, do you feel like you've earned a seat there? And I remember that stuck with me for a long time because I have like a hardcore case of imposter syndrome. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I've earned a seat. Like, what do you have to do? Like, should I go, like it says, in certain literature, like, do I need to go out and try some more? Like, she wasn't saying not to. She just wanted me to like, I think that she might have said that actually after I went to my first meeting and maybe I was still waffling a little bit. I was like, I went to a meeting and, but then when I went and really committed, that was it. Like that program of recovery. And it was the fall of 2012. And I know initially my sobriety date was at the end of October. I got really drunk when my grandmother died. And then I was like, that's it. And the next day I went to my first meeting. But then I came home in November and rationalized doing some other substances that I was like, I need this, even though it's prescribed to me and it was completely not a sober thing to do. So I changed my sobriety date to November 15th. So yeah, November 15th, 2012. And so I had 10 years in November.
Awesome, Carin. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I remember when you got sober and I saw, I think probably on Facebook or something, it's like, that's so cool. I had this, like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, that response. Was my thing with you. Is just like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk to her about this.
Most people, because I hid it very well until I didn't.
Yeah.
Or I didn't know fully until I did. And yeah, so AA got me sober for sure. I went to meetings in Florida, eventually moved back up to PA. I eventually met my husband, who is also in a program of recovery. And, it's interesting to have that because it's great because we hold each other accountable and ourselves accountable for things. But I laugh because I'm like, man, it's like hard work to like recover together. At the same time, I think, how does every couple not have this? Because like, how do you even, like,
oh, Carin, you are preaching to the choir because like during COVID, when the lockdown first happened and, so many people, I was sitting here thinking like, this is the worst thing for an addict. Like to be told like, now you have to be by yourself. I'm like, and I was just sitting there being so thankful that I have a spouse who he just naturally, he just doesn't drink. He just chooses not to. And so it, like, although he hasn't been through a sober program and he's not an addict, it just having that support though, it was like so huge. And so you're right. Sometimes I sit there and go, I don't know how people do it. Like,
yeah. It's interesting because, we have 3 children now. And, I guess on the experience, strength, hope part of this story, the past 10 years have brought so much to my life that I would not have without sobriety. I mean, as much as they say not to do this, I met my husband in a program of recovery. Oh, I said it.
I know. There's so many people who have, and it's fine. I'm like,
but that's where we meet people once we get sober too. We're not out at the bars. We're not like, all my lifestyle would have brought me to before was meeting people in places like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah, that, and I have thought everything, literally everything, jobs, connections to people. I mean, once I linked up to that, did the steps, and then, really started to form a concept of a higher power. And for me, it is the universe. It's sort of like the connection to all things. It's being like in sync rather than not the awesome bands, which, I mean, let's be honest, that's cool too. But it's being in sync with like, everything and everyone, to where I'm not rejecting the flow and I'm not fighting it. And then I see so many beautiful things unfold. And those things aren't always like things that I want, but they're things that I'll realize later that I or the people close to me needed. And then you see like, okay, that's what, God or higher power is to me. It's sort of dependent on the fact that I don't necessarily understand it in the moment. But yeah, so it's just been this like 10 years of growth and mistakes, just luckily not like as huge ones. I stayed in one place. Like I've been in a house for like the last 8 years. We bought a house 8 years ago, and I'm like, how does that, like, this is so not like what I did. I would just, if anything irked me in any way, I would just peace out and start a new life. And that has not been this. Like I did stray from AA for a minute, but stayed sober because I was exploring different like Buddhism and meditation, and there was a program of recovery linked to that.
Oh yeah. I've read there's a book Recovery Dharma, which is all loved it. I thought that was phenomenal.
And I did one similar to that in the Shambhala practice of Buddhism, and it was called Heart of Recovery. And it was really great. But, it was sort of like, I can liken it to when, and I think I've gone ahead and I've name dropped AA, so I'm just like, oh, well. What did they say? The jig is up.
Yeah.
When that all started, I'm sure there weren't, there's not like a website that tells you what 10 meetings are happening that day. And there's not, you're pulling it together and you're making it work in the beginning. And that's sort of what it was like when I did that program of recovery. It was great, but it was dependent on like this one meeting.
Yeah.
And we didn't have it figured out where like people could switch because like only one person had a key, and that had to go through like this and this person for like how the rent worked with this. So there's so much in our shared program of recovery that is so magical that I take for granted. Like the fact that there's no leader, the fact that there's like always a place you can go, and always people. And it's literally written in that like, if there's not a meeting, so you show up and the door's locked, well, you just need 2 people, and that's it. You have a format like at your fingertips. It's just, and that's what I need as I and I'm not one that believes that everyone has the same path for anything, recovery included, but that's what I need. I need to have that like consistent availability and an opportunity to be helpful too. Because, I will check myself out if I'm not externally accountable. And it's just, it's cool. It's really cool getting to like help other people. I don't feel like any kind of, again, the imposter syndrome sneaks up. Like, why do they think I know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's good too, because I can then call that humility. Maybe, I don't know.
Absolutely. Oh, Carin, this has been so fun. And I mean, it clearly, over the past 10 years, what you were saying is clearly why you are still sober today.
Yep. And I look at my now 3 children, and I'll end with this because this is really cool. We have 3 kids, and my daughter, I have a daughter and 2 sons, and she wrote me a letter on my 10-year anniversary this year.
Oh my gosh.
And it said, "Mommy, I'm so proud of you for 10 years." And she knew what it was because we talked to her and talked to them in an age appropriate way about, what we do. And she says, "I'm so proud of you for 10 years. Thank you for taking care of me today." And it was so weird because she said today, and I've been sober through my motherhood, but it's as if she had like an attunement to the idea of like,
you only have today.
For today, you only have today. And
Yeah.
I put that up in my window right by the kitchen sink so I can just read it every day.
That is so awesome.
And like, that's my higher power right there. Like, that is where it lives,
Amen. Oh, well, thank you so much for doing this.
Yes, thank you for asking me. I was really honored.
Yeah. I really hope that you enjoyed my friend Carin's story. It was so fun. I can't believe that we got to do that. And I can't wait till I maybe can see her again in my life. But it was so fun that we got to connect this way and just, yeah. So anyways, next week I have a wonderful new friend actually, named Carin. And she is coming to share her story. And actually, from what I understand, this was the first time she's ever really shared her sobriety story. So I am even more honored that she has entrusted me with that. So next week should be great. Please come back and listen. And as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Please follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you're a sober addict and you would like to come on and tell your story, as always, I would love to talk with you. Or if you have questions and are looking for some help, reach out. You can find me at my website, whyareYouSober.org, or email at sam@whyareYouSober.org. You can also find me on social media like Facebook and Instagram. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful week. And until next time, I am wishing you all peace, love, and a whole lot of joy.